does it matter what farming system is used to produce your food? Yes, it does. Now, you've seen a bunch of labels on your products: sustainably sourced, sustainably farmed, organic, naturally sourced products, and the labeling is a discussion completely on its own. But what I've seen is a most recent method, regenerative agriculture, that has caught the agricultural community by storm and has really flared up, surprising so many farmers on the economic benefits, the sustainability benefits, both for the farmer and for you as the consumer. That is to me very fascinating, especially since it influences the products that you eat. So I interviewed a regenerative agriculture farmer and consultant to find out what are the results that they've been seeing on their farms, how do they do it, what do, what does it mean for you as a consumer, and how can farmers adapt to that. Now, at this point, it's not on the labels yet, so it's not something to look out for, but it's something to understand and to know that what you see on the label is not always the most sustainable method, and this episode really explains it well. Enjoy, let me know what you think. If you'd like to see more, let me know what I should cover next. I'm here with Nick Foss, a regenerative agriculture expert and ag consultant, and we're discussing regenerative agriculture today, what it is, why we do it, and whatever comes from that. So Nick, if you wouldn't mind just briefly giving us an introduction of exactly who you are, what you do, and from there I'd like to go into depth and firstly understand what is regenerative agriculture and why it is important.
Nick Voss from Newton, Kansas. We're visiting here for the week from the States, and Landbouwweerblad asked me to be the keynote at their regenerative conference in Rates this week. And so basically the reason we started down this path was trying to reduce inputs, trying to work on better profitability, and then also basically trying to use less synthetics, get our nutrient density of our crops up. Everything is pretty tasteless and has become tasteless because of the old synthetic methods that we've been using. And if you compare fruit from a back garden and fruit from a commercial tree, it never tastes the same. So we started going down that path of nutrient density, and then you realize pretty quickly that it's a pretty intensive path that you go down, and a lot of unknowns. We've been focusing on chemistry and physical structure of the soil for the last 80 years, and we've ignored the biology. So once you bring the biology into the agricultural sector, then you stir the pot and have a lot of people that are not very happy about it, because every PhD, every thesis, every chemistry study that has been done in the last 80 years have ignored biology. And so when you start bringing biology in, there's a whole lot of changes that happens in the soil, and we're seeing those changes on our farm. And we get more yield with less water, more yield with less fertilizer, and so it's a very unique, interesting aspect of what we do, and we really like it.
And so let's maybe start with the basics. Is how does regenerative agriculture differ from commercial? But take us back to what is commercial, how does it work, what is standard practice in the products that we see every day on shelf, and why do we need to move away from that?
I would say conventional agriculture is basically the way we've been doing it the last 67 years, which is you start plowing or working the ground in the planting season. You apply the fertilizer that the co-op suggested. So the co-op would come out, take soil samples. They would do a recommendation for the fertilizer. That fertilizer recommendations is based on removal rates from the crop last year.
Okay.
And then they would do a recommendation for you of how much N, P, and K you're going to put on, which is basically the three nutrients we're focusing on now. Everything is really NPK based. Okay. Sometimes when there's a deficiency, like on zinc or iron, they would recommend it, but they'd also give you like a bulk product, just another synthetic product to do. These synthetic products are very high in salt, and so we've been building up the soils with the salt load, and all this is going down to the lower levels of the soil, creating, hard pans and hard layers in the soil where the roots doesn't go deeper than that. So we basically started going down this path and looking, when you start inserting biology and start doing no-till, start doing less plowing, less tillage, less chemicals, you notice that the plants are healthier. You notice more beneficial insects. There's several things that you see when you go down this path. And basically what the Regen Ag is just reducing the synthetic footprint and trying to raise a crop more in the way of Mother Nature would have raised it herself. So trying to mimic nature, trying to use nature to the best of your advantage, and not fight her every day. So
that's a very good point. But how is that practical in the way that, for example, the machinery and stuff like that works? Because if you have different cover crops and those things, do the machinery, out of a practical perspective, accommodate that?
It's some investment, but it's not that big a change. Okay. It's actually a lot cheaper. If you don't have to till, and so basically most regen farmers have a sprayer, so they still have a sprayer, they still do some chemical. Even though it's something we work towards to wean off of, it's not a cold turkey where you can just shut it off in one day. It's a 3, 5, 7 year process to use less and less chemical passes.
Okay.
So anyone has a sprayer, they already have a sprayer, so that's not an extra cost. A grain drill, most of the guys have a grain drill that they drill wheat with, that they drill rye with, and that's what we use to drill cover crops. So that's not an extra investment. If you buy a planter, there's some attachments that you need to change on the planter, a little bit more down pressure. You don't need row cleaners. You might need a coulter in the front. But so on the planter, really there's not that much changes. So the big changes is you don't need, if you would have needed a 400 horsepower tractor in the past to pull a 30, 40, 50 foot disc or a ripper, none of those big tractors are needed anymore. So if you used a 400 horse tractor, now you can go back to like a 200 horse tractor, and you don't need 5 of them, you only might need 2 of them. So the whole concept of regen farming is actually a lot cheaper input way of farming than the old way. So why a lot more guys doesn't jump on it is beyond me, because it's really a lot more profitable. But the myth out there is that you can have the same yields with no-till than with conventional till, which is also not true. A good friend of mine, Russell, just broke the world corn record, no-till, dry land, 459 bushel in Hickory, North Carolina.
Goodness.
So, he basically proved
that's wrong.
It's a myth. The whole, I got a customer that just raised corn, a 303 bushel no-till, irrigated 30 miles from me. So we're showing to these guys that yield is really a myth. It's not something that is making a difference. So why more guys are not looking into it, I don't know. But the actual cost or infrastructure needed to do the change is not that significant.
So what is some of the starting points if you would arrive on farm, let's say of a maize farmer? What's the number one thing to look at, and let's say a 3-year plan?
First, we're going to try and look at his rotations. See if there's not some rotations that he can basically have better crop fit from one crop to the other. If he's following soybeans, sometimes we want to do 2 corn crops and then a soybean crop, because corn, soy, there's not enough carbon in the system in the soybean crop. So you're actually reducing carbon if you alternate every year. But if you go 2 years corn and then 1 year soy, then you seem to maintain that. You're still not building organic matter, but you're not losing organic matter.
I see, yeah.
So then you try and figure out where in the rotation can you fit in a cover crop.
Okay.
Maybe if he's going to be 2 years corn, 1 year soy, a lot of the guys here in South Africa, different than the US, is a lot longer season corn, maize. And so if that's a difficult rotation, you might only have a cover crop 1 in 3 years.
Okay.
So there's different ways of rotating. If you bring animals into the equation, well, then it opens up a lot more doors because now you can go corn, you can do a cover crop, you can graze the cover crop, you can go back to corn. And if you do a corn cover crop corn rotation, then when you do the corn crop, you have enough fertility in the ground from the residue of the cover crops and from the nitrogen from the legumes from the cover crops and then from the cow manure that you don't have to fertilize. So when you go down this path, you can basically start raising 6, 7, 8 ton corn in the average areas without any fertility. Well, that becomes pretty significant if you start applying or start reducing fertilizer by that much. But yeah, if you've got a good high density grazing program with cover crops and you alternate corn and cover crops, you can basically go synthetic free. We've seen it. We're doing it right now with quite a few customers.
So, but is it possible without the use of livestock?
If you don't have livestock, it's a lot harder, and it takes a lot longer. I would say if you have a good livestock rotation, what you can do in 4 years with livestock is probably going to take you 10 years without livestock. So it speeds up the system a lot because not only with the biology from the manure, but also the hoof prints from the cows, all the stomping that they do and all the residue that they basically step on, that gets you seed to soil contact, your saprophytic fungi starts working with it, and so it's a lot more interaction with animals than you wouldn't have without them.
So let's talk about the soil biology. What would the immediate changes be that you see when going from conventional to, let's start with a non-livestock regenerative practice?
In a non-livestock, if you start doing cover crops, after the first cover crop season, you're going to start seeing a difference in the soil. The top right below the cover crops usually gets a little darker texture because of the carbon and the exudation from the cover crops. You're going to see better infiltration. You start seeing water holding capacity increases. If you get a 50 mil rain in the past, it runs off if it comes fast. If you start going down the regen path, you actually see the 50 mil rain and you don't see runoff. A good friend of ours in the US, always jokes, if a guy asks him how much it rains, he said, "How much rain did you get?" He said, "All of it." And so that's become a pretty common joke over there, that we don't have runoff, because if you look at runoff, a lot of people will tell you runoff is not the issue, infiltration is the issue. And so if you can't infiltrate your water, you can't keep it. And if you infiltrate it and keep it, then you can store it for longer. So you're making your soil more drought resistant, with the no-till and the cover crops. Do the cover crops use water? Yes, they do. But roots is 90% water, and the guys who always tell us that cover crops use water, they conveniently ignore the fact that fallow, which is when you basically keep a field clean for the year, you're losing about 75% of that moisture in evaporation. Plus, that soil is 30, 40 degrees hotter than the covered soil, so your microbes, you basically microwave your microbes in the top 2 inches.
Yes.
Well, most of your soil function is happening in the top 2 inches. So if you have bare soils, you really have no functioning microbes when it's 45 degrees Celsius, because if you measure the soil, usually in a hot summer's day where we're 41, 42 degrees Celsius, will be 25 degrees on the residue and 60 degrees on the bare soil. It makes a big difference. We're about 40 degrees Fahrenheit difference when bare soil versus covers. And if you don't think that helps or reduces or increases your evaporation, you're really not thinking, because it's a huge difference on temperature and how much we evaporate.
So what are some of the example of cover crops that you typically use and that you think would be applicable more in a South African environment?
So spending the week here with the guys, behind corn, it seems to be a little harder because of the lot fuller maturity corn that they plant. But behind soybeans, what a lot of guys do is putting in a rye, barley, triticale cover crop with some veg, with some radishes, and that's a really, really good, simple cover crop. You always want to have, in any cover crop, you want to have a brassica, a legume, and a grass. And so the guys in different areas, I'm a big context person, and it's kind of why I got invited here this week, because the 5 soil health principles is everyone knows it, everyone uses it, but the one that no one really uses to make it work is the context, and that's the sixth one. And because what you do in South Africa and what I do in Kansas and what a guy does in Australia is not the same.
Yeah.
The principles stay the same, but everyone's got to figure out for their region on their farm what works, and that's the context. We can't compare farmer A to farmer B because they don't have the same context, and that's the difference here. So any guy that wants to do something in this rotation here in South Africa is going to start looking at soybeans. Not only are you going to put the carbon back because soybeans actually reduces carbon, but soybeans also creates a pretty tough, hard soil sitting over the winter if it doesn't have a cover crop. And so we try and do a cover crop behind soybeans of a mixture of grasses, a legume, which could be clovers, could be veg, and then brassicas, turnips, radish, anything like that. So that's a basic starting point. Then you can decide to graze it in the spring, or you can decide to just terminate it chemically, or take tillage if you want to, or you could graze it and then plant green into it. What we do over by us is we'll plant green into that cover crop, so we don't have a bridge where the microbe's not alive.
Okay.
So we'll plant green into that rye cover crop, and then we'll terminate the cover crop that same day. And so when that corn plant sprouts or that soybean sprouts, it's got mycorrhizal fungi still functioning because the living roots is there. And that's how we keep that bridge. It's usually taking 2 to 6 weeks to get that bridge going, and ours don't have that gap because we immediately have the following. So that will be a pretty good place to start. Then if you go to the fallow rotation where you have the animals, then you can do that. It's really not profitable if you don't have the animals to go cover crop, fallow, corn. So you need to have a animal factor if you start doing corn cover. But basically behind soybeans, I think would be the place to start for you guys.
And well, let's talk about the livestock component thing. Would I be right in saying that even if you're not a livestock farmer and you want to do simply for your crops purposes regenerative agriculture, that it would regardless benefit you to have livestock?
For the guys that don't want to do livestock, there's a lot of neighbors in the winter that needs grazing.
Good point.
So it's become very common for us in the U.S. to have a guy that don't want to handle livestock, but he's got a rancher, and behind soybeans, you're going into the winter. That's a winter cover crop, and that's green. Well, the typical rancher's grass is always brown and dormant in the winter. So it's become a pretty good fit for us to have some of those ranchers come and pay that farmer per head, and that covers his seed cost and everything else. So there's definitely a lot of win-win situations out there where even if a guy doesn't want to have his own cattle or his own sheep or his own goats, he can still get a neighbor in and he can still get some animals on it.
And do you see, just out of the role, and I might get a little political here, but the role that livestock plays just in producing food, plant-based food itself, do you think that role of livestock enhances the productivity in general and that it is necessary, or can we do away with livestock in the crop farming system?
Cows are part of the solution, not the problem.
Okay.
And I think there's enough data out there to support that. But a million years ago, when the buffalo roamed the U.S. prairies, when the wildebeest were migrating down in Africa,
they're all ruminants.
So I mean, no one complained about climate change then, and so animals has never been part of the problem. I think it's like you said, it gets political, and in my opinion, regenerative agriculture should not be a political issue. If you look at the reason why we're doing it, to produce a more healthier product to the consumer, that's a reason we need to be looking at. In the U.S., healthcare costs is skyrocketing, and it's basically because of nutrientless products that we're eating.
Wow.
We don't get the nutrition in the food we eat anymore. There's a study that I can send to you that was done in the 40s that we're having to eat like 4 or 5 times the amount of fruit and meat and vegetables now to get the same nutrition than in the 40s.
Wow.
And that's all because of modern day ag and NPK basically. So yeah, I mean that's a reason. I don't think we should focus on the cows as being a problem. But yeah, I mean, if we look at Mother Nature, it's always had animals. We're trying to mimic Mother Nature. We're trying to do the same things and work with her. And she's got livestock, whether we like it or not. So, I think we need to find ways where livestock can help us restore and regenerate our soils and stop trying to blame them for everything that we're looking at.
Well, so back to the consumer and the end product, have you guys actually done test yourself, or do you have colleagues that have done test yourself, in the last, let's say, 5 years on the final product? Is it more nutritious?
Yes. There's a study, again, I can send it to you, that was done with some of the early adapters. Several of them I know very well, but where they had a study on both vegetables and on animals. And we're seeing a lot better omega-3 ratios. We're seeing a lot more nutrients in both the meat and the vegetables on a regenerative farm. So yeah, it's not a myth. Regenerative nutrient-dense food is a lot more nutritious than what your typical ag is.
And how closely associated is regenerative agriculture with organic? Because that's the current label going around is organic and contains natural products, but I don't think that's relevant.
No, and the joke in the US is, the only difference between organic farming and conventional farming is the organic guys spray at night. And so so that's the joke that's going around. I think the organic label has lost a little bit of its bite. They've watered down a lot of rules and regulations, and they still do spray. They just spray with biological products. But the fact that with organic industry comes short is the fact that they have to till the ground several times, and so most of their soils are bacterial. Now there is some, before they yell at me, there is some that do a lot of composting, have some healthy soils, and they're trying to do things right. But the fact that they can't terminate weeds is still, no-till organic is where we all want to be. But it's also, a little bit of utopia that is hard to get. I know there's some claim that some guys are doing it, but doing 100 hectares in the front of the house and not doing the 900 behind the house is not quite doing it yet. And so I think it's our goal. I think we all want to be. I don't think any one of the regen industry really cares about the organic label. I've got some farms that I haven't put any chemistry or chemical on for 4 years now. I have no desire to get organic certification because my product is superior to the organic in the sense of nutrient density. We are far surpassing the organic industry. So I don't think we're in competition. I think the organic guys might think we are sometimes, but I think the organic guys that are seeing the light on the regen side is also, they can claim the chemical-free side, but they can't claim the nutrition side.
And from what I hear, it's the whole purpose behind regenerative agriculture is in the name. It's not for a sticker or for anything else. It's about optimizing what you have and leaving it better for the generations after you.
If you look at the organic matter in the soils on the organic farms, they have gone nowhere. They're still depleting it. They're still going down. The only industry that is actually restoring the soils is the regenerative industry, and that's a fact. And I think they're seeing, we can hold more water, we can hold more nutrients.
It's more productive, it's more economic.
Well, and that's the other thing. When it comes to yield, organic is known for not being able to have the same yield as conventional farming. In regenerative farming, we can say that we are actually the same and higher yielding in some places. That is not the case for regen. So if you look at regenerative versus organic in that sense, we're a higher yielding industry with more nutritious food, and we're following Mother Nature. I mean, so we try our best to again farm with her, not farm against her, and it's hard, but and it takes time. But the reward is very satisfying.
And do you think, because from my personal opinion, I don't think regenerative agriculture is getting enough credit. So do you think there would in future actually be a process where it is put on the label and the consumer is made aware of it? Because I think it's fantastic. The consumer needs to know that this is the healthier product, but I don't see it being realistic.
I think it's a little bit of a catch-22. You know, right now we kind of have this niche product that we can actually sell at a premium because it's a healthier product. We've seen some retailers in the U.S. get involved in this, and we touched on it a little bit, and I call it out quite a bit and call it greenwashing, because they will buy a ingredient in a 12-ingredient product and then call the product a regenerative product and make a big old PR launch about it, and it's not a higher crop product. And so I think it's a catch-22. Do we want to educate the consumer that the food they're getting is not have the nutrients they think? Yes, absolutely, and that's what we're trying to do. You know, we've been doing this now for almost a decade, in basically what we call, you know, the kindergarten method of show and tell. You know, like kindergartners bring everything to school. So we're trying to do the same thing. You know, when we do a difference, when we do something different, method of applying fertilizer, anything we do different, the regen crowd is a very sharing crowd, and they do a lot of show and tell. Whereas you look at the conventional crowd and high yield crowd, they keep their secrets. They don't want to share anything. It's the opposite with regen. Regen farmers can't wait to share something new that they've seen a result on or improvement, and they want to share it with the consumer, because the consumer has a right to know that there is this method of farming out there that they're actually paying for in the retailer, but the retailers, you know, prefer to, you know, get involved in some carbon scheme and pay that way to get carbon neutral. Well, why not buy food that's carbon negative?
Wow,
you know, when you start going down that route, these retailers, if they're really shifting their focus to some carbon negative grown food, then why would they have to pay some third party for a carbon deal? Why not pay the farmers that is building the carbon? But it seems to be like the money's in the third parties, and the money is not going from the retailer to the farmer. And I think that's where the whole paradigm shift needs to happen.
Yeah. Well, I've got two questions there. The one is, I understand you are allowed to, well, you're able to sell your food at a premium because it's healthier, and that's normally what happens. Do you see that shifting around? Because the unfortunate thing, and especially like in South Africa, the least fortunate are those who actually need the more higher density food because they can't afford the supplements or a diverse diet, so they would benefit more from regeneratively produced food. Will it always be the case that we do pay more for those producers or not?
I think you're probably going to end up in a market paying higher for a superior product, yes. Okay. But what you got to remember is, and I always compare it with dog food. If you buy Science Diet dog food, and I'm just throwing a name out there, but a high quality dog food, your big male mature dog is going to eat maybe a cup of food a day.
I see.
If you go to the typical grocery store that is a big brand market and you buy the cheapest dog food you get, he's going to eat like a bucket of food a day.
That's true.
And so if you take that, you know, scenario and you do the comparison, then smaller portions are way more nutritious than what the normal big portions are. And if you look at, you know, the habits of people, then I think, you know, it's gonna level itself out. I think it would be, if farmers get paid more, I think the price is gonna come down. But right now, it's a niche market, and so everyone's trying to get on it, and that's why I think it's a little overpriced right now. But I think the value is absolutely there, because I think we need to look at quality, not quantity, and so you get a lot more nutritious product.
Yeah. Well, and then my follow-up question, and I do agree with you, and I'm hopeful in the fact that more farmers can hopefully adopt this practice and make it more standard practice, and just out of a sustainability perspective as well. So you mentioned earlier about the carbon negativity. Just simplify it in how you are carbon negative, and have you done the test? Do you measure it?
So basically, if I would compare to a conventional farmer, one, we're burning 10% of the diesel what they do.
Okay, yeah.
Two, we irrigate 20% less than they do. So if that's the standard, we're coming in, you know, 200% less than their cost of production or their carbon footprint for growing a crop. If you look at synthetics, that synthetic got made somewhere. That's got a footprint. If you look at the chemical got made somewhere. So every time we don't use a synthetic product, there's like 7 stages you're avoiding. And all those stages have a carbon footprint. And so when we plant a cover crop, those seed come from somewhere, but a lot of that seed we try and source local now. And so everything becomes more local when you start looking at a regen system. If you look at a typical regen farmer, outside Johannesburg, where's his market going to be? Johannesburg. That's a 30-kilometer deal. Where's a conventional guy's grain go? Goes to the silo goes to the mill goes to the flour. It's a whole different process when you start looking at regen, and when you have pockets of regen, the whole footprint is just so much smaller than the normal conventional model.
Yeah.
And that's where we're coming from. All that savings, when you start looking at it and you compare it to a normal model, we're actually coming in way at a negative. And then we're not even, counting the carbon that we're actually, the carbon sequestration that we're doing while we're growing a more nutritious crop.
Yeah, because that's what I'm curious about is, do you do those measurements?
Yes, we do. And so organic matter, the carbon in the soil is directly basically linked to organic matter. But, we've almost doubled our organic matter in the last 10 years.
That's fantastic.
So when you look at, again, that's thousands of pounds of carbon per acre. So when you look at everything, we have the data to show these guys. Do we sell our data or our carbon? No, we don't, because I don't think we're getting the value for it. And so a lot of guys in the regen industry is holding on to their data, holding on to their carbon, because we'd much rather see the consumer get a healthy product and get paid for our carbon in that way than the consumer paying for a higher product now, that retailer paying some third company for a carbon product, and then the carbon company coming to us and wanting to pay us $10 an acre.
Yeah.
So we're trying to cut out the whole greenwashing link and actually give the consumer something worth paying for, because they're paying for it now whether they like it or not.
Yeah, so not just replacing the value of what they're actually getting. And out of curiosity's sake, how does if you say you do the carbon measurements, how would a non-livestock system compare in terms of carbon sequestration with a livestock system?
The livestock is gonna increase your carbon a lot quicker.
Carbon sequestration.
Yes, the biology from a livestock operation, it's like on steroids. So anytime you can incorporate animals, and that's what we talked about, cows part of the solution, not the problem.
Exactly.
Anytime you bring in animals, you're going to cycle, you're going to speed up the process. The whole carbon functioning cycle just goes on hyper mode. So yes, you can do this without animals, but animals is a key element on how we're operating. And that's, why we started with the sheep and incorporating the sheep into the farm. We used to have a separate enterprises. And now the sheep is incorporated into the farm.
And okay, so moving away from the crops, then in that sense, what does regenerative agriculture look like if you move from standard commercial livestock production to a regenerative system?
I think the first thing is just cutting your pasture in half.
Okay.
If a conventional guy has 100 cows on 1,000 hectares, the first thing you're going to want him to do is do 500 hectares. You don't have to go into 1,000 little 1 acre deals the first day. It's a process, and we want to get to a high mob grazing type deal, mimicking the wildebeest, mimicking the buffalo, but it's not always possible. And we always try and tell guys, you got to stay profitable. If you do this conversion from conventional ag to regenerative ag, do not lose the farm. Like don't let ideology cloud your judgment and common sense, and then lose sight of where you want to be. You got an end goal, but not all of us can get there in a year. So I would say first year, take the 1,000 hectares, divide it in two. Next year, take the 500, divide it in two. And then, systematically go down. We usually graze, if we do winter stockpile cover crops, we usually graze it for 7 days and then we move. If it's winter stockpile that's high volume, we might go 14 days, but also we have no regrowth, we don't come back.
Okay.
And so it just depends on the scenario. If we're grazing like a green cover crop, like rye or wheat or triticale, sometimes we'll move them every 3-4 days, sometimes every week, mostly because of logistics. but then we'll come back after 4 weeks or 5 weeks or 6 weeks. So it just depends. But yeah, I mean, if you just take the animal perspective, I would say, you know, a lot of guys go a lot deeper into vaccinations, into deworming, into applying fertilizer on the pastures. I mean, there's a lot of things you can focus on, but I think the main thing we always start on is just having the pasture or putting the pasture in full and try and move those cows at least every week or every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. Depends on how much, you know, fencing you got, how much opportunity. Water is a constraint sometimes. Not everyone has water everywhere. So I would say it's a slow process, but you know, getting those cows moved and not leaving them. The problem with that is, you know, when you put cows on a fresh pasture, the first week they're going to go all for the good stuff.
Yes.
They're going to take the candy, and then the second week they might go for the average stuff, and then the third week all the mean grasses and unnutritional, you know, sour grasses is left. Well, then that cow loses 10 pounds. It will lose weight and not eat that third. But if you put it in a smaller paddock, it's forced to eat the little things, the big things, and all the nasty things in the same. Yes, and then it doesn't lose weight. So it's the cow will always go for the nice stuff first, and then they won't eat the other stuff. So if you force them in a small deal and then move them, also the moving to a new pasture is really seems to be exciting for that animal, for their hormones. We see better conception rates on the sheep.
That's
if we move them. They're just a happier animal. And so I see several advantages, but yeah, the biggest thing is just start moving them. I mean, you know, cut your pastures into smaller pieces and start moving them.
Well, on a labeling note, so does this actually count as free range or not? Because it's pasture based, but since you confining them and moving them, it's technically not free range, but the animal and what you've just said, it's a happier animal. So
I think free range and chicken and free range and cow means two completely different things. Because in chickens, our chickens are free range. I mean, they eat bugs, they scratch everywhere, and they follow the sheep sometimes, and you know, just they're outside. The cows, actually, you're better off not. I mean, they're still on fresh, free pasture every day, but you do limit their movement so that you can have that dense mob grazing effect that Mother Nature usually does.
And it's not a confined, it's just strategically
Well,
guiding them.
Yeah, you're not feeding them in a confined area.
Yes.
They're determining their area.
Exactly.
They're moving their confinement every day.
Yes.
And so, I don't see that as a confinement issue at all. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of data out there that, you know, the cows are a lot healthier when they eat several more species out of that pasture than just the cows who's used to eating the good grass.
Is that something to do with the microbes?
That is something to do with the fact that you're forcing them to eat the grass, the forbs, the legumes. I mean, there's a lot of more nutrition in those pastures than just grasses. And it's like a salad bar. You know, when you go to a salad bar, you don't just pick the lettuce leaves. You do the lettuce, the tomatoes, the cucumbers, and that's what your gut wants. It wants, you know, different colors and different enzymes in the gut. And it's the same for cows. When a cow starts eating different species, you have different enzymes in the gut, and that cow's actually healthier, and you got a healthier rumen.
Well, how does this strategy apply to just normal natural grasslands as well? Because I'm thinking now of how the species dynamics would differ. If you say you work with Mother Nature and the way that nature would have been originally, how does the biodiversity change and how does the species alter? Because obviously you have your pioneering plants and your succession plants and all of those things that would naturally occur. Does it mimic that more when you practice that high density grazing, or does it change completely?
So it changes in the sense that, so we have corners off our pivots that we stopped farming 4 years ago. 4 years ago, this was farmland that was, when I got the farm, brown as this table, and it was bare swamp. We started grazing these corners with the sheep. We started watering the pivot and do cash crops, do cover crops. I mean, typical rotations on the pivot, but the corners, all we did was graze the corners with the sheep. And so if there was weeds, we'd go in, graze it, we'd move them to another corner. And we kind of started this rotation, and every time there was a pretty good volume of weeds, because that was all that was there was weeds.
Yeah.
Well, fast forward that 4 years later, and we have a solid grass corner of right now 7, 8, 9 grass species.
Wow.
Some forbs are coming in, and we didn't sow anything. All we did was graze it, management, and take the competition out, and Mother Nature supplied the rest. So when you start implementing regenerative grazing and mob grazing on these grass pastures, even a native pasture that you think is native, we saw this in rates on Monday and Tuesday. There's some pastures out there that used to have 5, 6 species that now have 40, 50 species.
Oh, wow.
And the farmer didn't sow a single thing. All he did was to implement the mob grazing, and when that system, Mother Nature is self-regulating and self-healing. And so when you start, basically fixing the system, then Mother Nature provides. And that whole movie, Build It and They Will Come, that basically, same as the earthworms. If you create an environment for earthworms, they're going to come back. And so we're seeing the same with the grasses. The more you graze, the more species becomes back. So exactly like you said, Mother Nature doesn't like being naked, so she'll cover the ground with anything that's quick, and those are usually weeds, because you got a balance problem. And as those sheep take out the competition, the nicer grasses come back. And so it's a really fine line. But when you start managing it with animals in a high density grazing, Mother Nature really provides, and she'll bring up the whole salad bar again.
And there's a whole word, regenerate, in
That's
everything
what
you
it's all
described.
about.
That's beautiful.
That's what it's all about.
And where do feedlots fit into this? And do feedlots still have a space in the future?
I think so. I don't think we have the space or the acres to raise or finish the demand for meat that there is. And whether we're on we like meat or we don't like meat debate, I think is irrelevant. But the status quo, I think there's still the demand for the cheaper, more commercialized beef. So I think that the markets are going to grow on the region side? Absolutely. Is cost going to be a problem for the consumer wanting the cheapest product? Probably. So I don't see feedlots going away just yet. And I don't think we can survive without them just yet. But I do think that their numbers will continue to shrink as we go into this movement where people want to see more nutritious beef and more nutritious lamb. So I don't think we can go cold turkey on that, but I do see them losing numbers and losing volume going forward.
I see. Well, yeah, that's interesting because some of the perspectives are on the input side that it takes much quicker to finish the animal in a feedlot, hence you have less methane emissions. So do you think there is a place where we can have a balance between the two systems?
You mentioned the free range earlier. So there's a lot of grass-fed out there that is not as grass-fed as they think it is. And so grass-fed right now, silage, you can grow GMO corn, silage it, and feed it, and it's still considered grass-fed. Okay. And so there's a lot of loopholes in the industry right now that grass-fed is not quite what it means. And we're trying to change that because, do you need to supplement something in a desert in a winter and put some hay out for those animals if there's a blizzard? Yes, absolutely. Is that the norm? No. But when you start putting something in a feedlot and call it something, then it's hard to come by. So what guys have done now, they have put feed bunks on a 100-hectare pasture, and there's 500 cows in there, and then they just feed them every night. So they're really not on pasture. Yeah. They're still in a feed yard. They're just in a 100-hectare feed yard. And so, things like that, I don't think that's really, I think people want to know where their food comes from, and I don't think that's what they want. And so we've been trying to be as transparent. We feed our sheep corn, we feed our sheep grass. We have not two different flocks, but we do have a corn need on some of our customers, and so we do have some sheep that we feed corn. We try and raise the corn locally. Sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't get it, depending on the season, but we try and grow our corn locally, feed local corn, and so we do have grain-fed sheep. But, the Ramland crop that we have is grass-fed, and they're on hay that we grow ourselves, so the food that we feed them, we grow ourselves. It's all a cover crop mix. It's not a monoculture. So like right now, the feed that they're on is a mixture of non-GMO soybeans, some cowpeas, some hay grazer, and some radish and some cowpeas.
Oh, that's nice and diverse.
Yes, and so we have like a 6-7 species mix that we grew, we baled it, and then that's what we stockpile for the sheep. And so it depends on what again, we get back to context. The guy that's in a 1,000 millimeter rainfall area, he has a lot more options than a guy in the 300 mil.
Yes.
That doesn't mean the guy in the 300 mil area can't be regenerative agriculture. It just means his system's going to be a little different. And I think we need to make sure people understand that there's no perfect utopia. We all have to make it different, and that's where the context comes in of this operation is not going to be the same as this operation, but we have the same goal.
Yeah, and you mentioned the GMO. Where is GMO something to fear, something bad? Because GMO has also allowed us to get resilience in certain systems, but I see a movement going away from that. Why is that? And will we still have GMO?
I think there's a lot of politics in it that shouldn't be in it. We sell both GMO and non-GMO corn as a business. We grow both GMO and non-GMO corn as a farm. And we prefer to feed non-GMO corn to our sheep, and we prefer to give corn to our sheep that's not been sprayed with chemical. But that's a personal choice. I'm not gonna, tell my neighbor to do it. That being said, where we plant GMO corn in a healthy regenerative system, we're seeing the mycorrhizal fungi associate with that seedling just as much as a non-GMO plant.
Okay.
So we're not seeing, and I've kind of rattled some feathers with that statement, but when I dig up a corn seedling that has just emerged, that is just packed with rhizosheets, with mycorrhizal fungi and just full of glomalin, it's hard to tell me that seedling doesn't want to associate with biology. And that's the rumor that's out there on the GMO side. Is the GMO is not as nutritious because it doesn't have now when you plant that GMO corn in a conventional system supplied by NPK, I could see that.
I see.
But if that corn seedling wakes up in a healthy soil full of microbes packed with energy, we're not seeing it. So
it's context again.
I think it's context again, because if you look at the studies that's been done by all the universities, it's all done on conventional soils. It's not done in regenerative soils. So unless they start bringing me studies that show that, that's hard to do. And again, on our farm, on our context, we're not seeing a difference.
Okay.
And so the same with our corn. We've done some just silly farm tests on non-GMO and GMO corn, and the sheep don't care. I mean, they're going to eat it.
Yeah, and the quality, I'm assuming, is also...
If it's raised on the same farm, the quality is the same.
Okay.
I think the soil is what makes the difference. And if you are in a naked and hungry, feverish soil, like Ray Archuleta calls it, then I think the GMO corn is going to have a hard time being nutritious. But if you plant...
I mean, with the non-GMO, in any case, also not have a hard time being nutritious in the same context, or not?
I think so there is some facts that GMO corn is bred to associate less with certain enzymes.
I see. Okay.
So in a normal conventional soil, the GMO is not going to look for a few things, and the non-GMO will look for it.
I see. Okay.
So your typical open pollinated varieties, when it sprouts, it wants to look for this nutrient. It wants to look for that nutrient, where some of the GMOs is bred out of it.
Okay.
But it's like ask and you shall receive, or knock, the door will open. Well, it's the opposite, because when that GMO seedling wakes up in that healthy soil, he's not asking for it. The microbes are like, hey, look what I got for you, So it's a whole different scenario. But I think when they start doing the test, we're just not seeing it. I mean, we on our farm, when we dig I carry a shovel all the time with me, and I like digging in the farm, and so we're just not seeing the difference.
And how can you, almost as one of my last questions, motivate farmers to just pay more attention to their soil, whether they're a crop farmer or whatever, livestock farmer? I mean, we are all soil farmers at the end of the day.
Boots on the ground. That's a big difference we have in the U.S. We don't have farm managers. Every manager is a worker. Every worker is a manager. And so labor is a problem. So we don't have the luxury of driving past the field. We have to walk a field. And so the biggest way I would start with that is, if you are going to get into a regen deal, is start digging, start walking fields, start looking at the changes. The system sells itself.
Yes.
When you start walking into fields and you start digging and you look at the aggregate stability and you look at the earthworms, the cottage cheese black soils that it starts building, the smell of the soil is a Graham Sade has a word for it, but the chemicals that get released when you start smelling that soil is really what makes a difference in I'm not going to say it makes you feel good, but it does that literally. The smell of coffee, the smell of soil, the smell of there's several things that just have that significant smell, and it's one of them. I mean, when you start walking into some fields and start looking at it and digging, it's just a whole different ball game of happiness that you develop when you walk the farm. A lot of guys that's in a conventional system, they'll drive by, they'll look at the plant, they'll look at the deficiencies on the plant, but they're not looking at the root cause, and the root cause is the soil. So when you keep the soil happy, the soil will feed the plant. And so I think the biggest focus is just start paying attention to the soil, because it's been dirt for the last 80 years. It's not been soil, and dirt's dead. So
good point. Well, thank you. This has been incredibly insightful, and I hope to wake more people up to, firstly, the consumer to know that there are more nutritious products out there, but the farmer, that it is possible, it is more profitable, and at the end of the day, more sustainable, which is essential for our future food system.
I think the profitability that you just, caught on is the biggest difference. It really is a lot more profitable system. And it takes time to get there. It's just like anything else. But once you start focusing and thinking outside the box, get the mindset change that you can grow the same crop with less fertilizer, and you take that risk. I always tell guys, when you have a 100-hectare field, take 1 or 2 passes through the field and shut off fertilizer. When you get the co-op to spread it, tell them to leave 1 pass. Tell them to make another pass at half rate. Start challenging yourself. I mean, we're so dumbed down and used to the same thing for every year, and then expecting a different result. It's not happening. So, start challenging yourself and start reducing your fertilizer. Start looking at things that make sense, and then look at the results on your own farm. And pretty soon, you realize that, man, I've been over-fertilizing for the last 50 years. So, and then you start looking at profitability, and you realize you're actually way more profitable doing it. So that would be my take, is just, let the guys think outside the box a little bit. And I'm not saying do the whole farm. Take 1-2% of the farm.
And
take your worst field. What have you got to lose? If your best field is the most profitable, don't mess with it. Leave it alone. Start with your worst field and try and get your worst field started, and then get into the program and look at the progress you can make on it, because it's already your worst field. So what have you got to lose?
That's a very good point. Well, thank you. And I'm very hopeful to know that farmers work incredibly hard. And I don't think that that's something that always has enough light shed on that. And it's really encouraging to see that farmers really work especially hard to also provide the consumer with the best, not just take, but farmers are actually the most giving there is.
We're the only one that pays transport both ways for everything. So it's about time we start getting paid for, high quality product, but then we got to supply a high quality product.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of us are willing to do that, and we want the consumer to know that, we eat the same products. That's what we want. We want our kids to have healthier food. We want our grandkids to have healthier foods, and so that's the whole goal. It's trying to make a living raising good, high quality crops, basically.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Nick. This has been fantastic.
You
If
are
don't
very
have
welcome.
any last thoughts, then I would conclude on that positive message.
No, if you got questions, we're here. Otherwise, we're good. Thank you.
Thanks. Just briefly for the audience, where can they find you if they want to do consulting or follow you?
I'm on LinkedIn. I have some other social media accounts too, but it's more of a not a business. So I would say LinkedIn would be about the best place.
Okay.
We do a lot of promotions on Regen Ag on LinkedIn, and that's probably the best place to find me, and Nick Voss on LinkedIn. So
Okay, fantastic. Well, there you've heard it. Thank you so much for listening. If you agree to this agree, like, follow, share. And if you agree to disagree, drop it in the comments and we'll take it from there. You can also go to the website agreetodisagree.com to see how you can get involved, sponsor, get a tour of your factory or farm that you want people to see, or simply ask a few questions that you'd like answers to.